Tall Tale TV.
Of Monsters and Mushrooms by Lesley Herron. Chapter 27, Gymnopolis. Alpha readied himself for the onslaught of attacks he was sure this mechanical monstrosity would bring. He hunkered down, lowering his shoulders and digging his fingers into the earth. He had not come this far just to be taken down by two uncultured ruffians and their walking pile of trash. Well, at least that's what he thought the machine was there to do. But when the robot suddenly veered off course and ambled down a broken alley, Alpha watched it leave the battle, unable to express his confusion with the busted features of his face. Brig craned his neck to see the giant figure of Alpha disappearing behind a building.
Attila, where are you taking us? The battle's back that way.
I'm not steering it. Trashbot has his own protocols.
Well, how do we adjust this thing's protocols? 'Cause I don't fancy being smashed to pieces on the back of what I am sure is an entirely too explosive machine.
All attempts to appear heroic had been abandoned as Brig clung desperately to Trashbot while it veered around another corner. Attila was struggling to fish something from his boot when the giant machine took a hard left, threatening to toss them both overboard.
Hey, buddy, think you could do something about these handcuffs?
With a barely perceivable effort, Brig reached up and snapped the chain like used dental floss. Attila sighed gratefully and reached into his boot, pulling out a small square box covered in buttons. He began pressing them in what appeared to be a random sequence.
Trashbot, turn around! The bad guy is back that way!
Trashbot 4000, objective override.
Hey, it worked!
Attila beamed at his friend for a half second. Then Trashbot slammed on the brakes, spinning itself around 180, and causing Attila to sail several feet through the air before Brig caught hold of his pant leg and hauled him back up. The ground shuddered beneath the thundering footfalls of the unsteady machine. It was picking up speed, charging headlong into battle. Brig looked up at the massive figure of Alpha, and even in his current damaged state, he knew this fight wouldn't last long. Trashbot would crumple when pit against such monstrous strength.
Attila, does this thing have any guns or anything?
Brig was scanning the body of the robot, hoping for a secret hatch or hidden compartment. Attila rarely built anything without at least one surprise weapon, or 12. Attila was busy adjusting his poncho so it would billow heroically behind him.
Pshaw, guns are for the weak. Trashbot doesn't need anything that lame.
Brig whipped around to see that they were charging straight into the looming shadow of Alpha's colossal figure. He wriggled his mustache for a moment. If they stayed, surely they would be crushed beneath a massive fist. Or the vehicle would explode, or malfunction and turn on them. He nodded, mostly to himself at that point. Any damage they sustained in the fall would be easier to survive than being impaled by a hunk of scrap metal. He had too much experience with Attila's tinkering to trust any machine at this point. Brig wrapped a beefy arm around the scrawny merc's middle and jumped. Alpha watched the two humans escape the mechanical creature. Curious, he thought. Not that it mattered. Even with only one arm, this machine posed little threat. He reached out to flatten it with an open palm. Trashbot stopped in its tracks. It raised its tiny mechanical appendages in the air as if to plead its surrender.
Trashbot 4000, negotiation tactic activated.
Alpha paused, pulling back his hand to peer down at the machine. Flabbergasted, but prepared to listen, he leaned in, almost level with the tiny metal creature. A maniacal cackle rose from Trashbot, and it activated a separate set of steel beam arms that slid out, pounding Alpha square in the nose.
Trashbot 4000, sucker punch activated. Ha, ha, loser.
Brig heaved a sigh. This machine was Attila's, all right. Attila punched a couple more buttons, gave an evil grin, and then stowed the remote for safekeeping. Brig reached over and grabbed Attila by the arm.
Come on, we gotta get out of here.
Wait! Madam Whisper!
Attila managed to wriggle free and ran over to a broken pile of twisted armor and torn gossamer wrapped around a pile of shattered bone fragments. Brig watched, with trepidation, as his friend began gathering up all the pieces that had fallen away from the bulk of the body.
Attila, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think she's dead.
What? Oh, right. Nah, she always looks like that.
Attila was walking around, using one of her ornate boots as a bucket, filling it with vertebrae.
Grab her, would ya?
Sure.
Brig didn't know why, but he pulled the armored body from the crater and slung the bundle over his shoulder like a sack.
Okay, now can we get out of here?
The sound of metal gnawing against metal drowned out most of Brig's words. Attila turned back to see Trashbot wrenching one of Alpha's fingers back farther than it was meant to bend, threatening to remove it completely.
Ha ha! I knew he wasn't just a hunk of garbage!
Brig rolled his eyes as he grabbed the back of the merc's poncho again and flung him out of the way of oncoming debris. From over Brig's shoulder, someone spoke.
Ah, Slayer, your servants are so well trained.
Madam Whisper's ethereal voice sent a shiver down Brig's neck, and his mustache went limp.
And such biceps.
Brig turned to face Attila. He mouthed the words, servant, and raised a thick eyebrow at him. Attila gave his friend a curt shake of his head. Now was not the time to argue about who was a servant and who was stealing his woman with unnaturally large arm muscles.
Yeah. Are you okay?
Madam Whisper was pulling her body back together, piece by piece, and sealing them in place with flashes of bright blue light that illuminated the buildings around them as they hurried to find cover.
I will live. Now, get back out there and deal with what remains of the worms, or I will overlook this valiant gesture and hang you for your treason.
Her voice became hard and rigid, filled with a truthful malice. She raised her sword at Attila, cementing her threats. Attila balked, the color draining from his face as he tiptoed out of sword range.
Of course, madam. We just wanted to make sure you were safe.
Typical, Brig thought. It was just like Attila to flirt with a woman when they were moments from death. He twitched his mustache, shook his head, and shoved Attila back toward the battle.
We'll take care of what we can, ma'am.
He paused mid-step and looked down at the sword still clutched between her skeletal digits.
May I?
What was once an apartment complex erupted into a pile of rubble as Trashbot sailed straight through it. Alpha let out a triumphant shout, slamming his fist into the ground to force his body up into an awkward, one-legged crouch. The seismic gesture was not lost on the remaining worms. Eric looked around as a tidal wave of segmented bodies burst free from the ground, swarming fast and hard toward Alpha. They surged past the remaining soldiers of a battered troop, swallowing some and simply trampling others. The few that went unscathed fled the scene, dropping their weapons and helmets behind. The worms slammed into Alpha, gnawing at anything they could reach with blood-stained mandibles. I know I keep saying this, but we really should go. Eric looked down at Evan, or at least where the kid had been moments before. He whipped around in time to see the tiny merc laughing with manic glee as he scooped up a dropped firearm that was larger than he was.
Come on, you big baby. Grab a gun and let's do some damage.
Evan laughed again, tossing the doctor a gun. How am I a baby? Eric caught the weapon awkwardly, looking down at it with hesitation. He wasn't a big fan of firearms. Before the incident in the underwell, he'd never even fired a gun. And as he recalled, that endeavor had not gone so well. What am I even supposed to do with this? The worms are basically bulletproof. He looked back up, expecting the tiny merc to still be there. Evan was already gone, disappearing into the cloud of battle. Eric sighed, holding back a mouthful of curses, and begrudgingly followed him. Trashbot exploded out of the rubble, plowing into Alpha like a charging bull and knocking him backward onto his rear. Attila was struggling to find a flammable portion of a worm with his pocket torch as Brig drove the curved edge of Madam Whisper's blade along the underside of its belly, pulling it up through the beast like a skinning knife. Green blood plastered them both as the creature fell to the ground. Madam Whisper marched out among her remaining troops, shouting orders and rallying an assault. Evan ran through the throngs of worms and soldiers straight into battle like a knee-high berserker, firing at anything larger than a man. Eric struggled to keep up with the pint-sized madman, stumbling over fissures and his own feet. He made nervously awkward gun noises while pretending to use his weapon. There was no way he could hit anything in all this, and was more likely to just injure himself in trying. Alpha grabbed one of Trashbot's legs and flipped it over onto its back.
You worthless piece of garbage! You are not even worthy of my attention!
He clawed his way on top of the machine and tore at any of the components he could reach, pulling and ripping off what he could.
I will end your existence!
Trashbot! No! Attila abandoned Brig's side and tore off down the battlefield. He jumped over debris and exposed wiring, clambering over dead worms, and bullied his way past living ones. He picked up a small chunk of broken concrete and heaved it with all his might at Alpha.
Take that, you overgrown ink stain!
The rock embedded itself between two of the giant digits of the Guardian's remaining foot. Alpha pulled his attention away long enough to see the obnoxious human lobbing useless projectiles at him. He groaned dramatically in exasperation, and then he reached down with a hand and flicked away the annoying gnat. The force of the attack was enough to knock Attila out of his boots and send him sailing through the air like a scrawny superhero. He landed in a heap of dead worms and uprooted asphalt. Attila wanted to say that he was able to grin and bear the pain, that he got up and showed Alpha what's what. But in reality, he gave a feeble attempt to roll over, a half-hearted yo mama joke, and then darkness overtook him. Eric dropped his gun as he watched Attila collapse in a heap between two dead worms. Hey, help me get him out of there! He shot the order at Evan and scrambled over toward the unconscious merc.
You go ahead. I got your back.
Evan laughed as he picked up a forgotten rocket launcher. At the sight of its felled master, something inside Trashbot malfunctioned. A frayed wire arced, or a line of code missed a zero, or perhaps an unintentional setting in its protocols engaged. Whatever it was, the robot suddenly had its first real thought. Hell no.
Trashbot 4000, beat down mode. Initiated.
A hidden panel in Trashbot's shoulder opened, and a makeshift harpoon made out of an old boat anchor flew out and sank into Alpha's neck. Trashbot twisted, hauling Alpha to the ground with the chain now hanging between them. The stone giant fell to the earth with tremendous force, face down in the dirt and clenching at his neck with his remaining hand. Trashbot clambered onto Alpha's back and began hauling on the chain that was now wrapped around the monster's throat. Trashbot let one of his extended arms fall away, and the ceiling fan saw blade that was hidden beneath started to spin, faster and faster. Alpha let out a howl of pain as the hot-tempered robot sank the buzzsaw into his spine, cutting a massive trench through his body. The air was charged with static as bolts of electricity arced free from Alpha's severed mechanical structure. Like tiny flashes of lightning, the blue lights danced around the damaged machine and surged into the ground. For a brief moment, the city came back to life. The surge of electricity traveled fast, zigzagging between structures and broken alleyways. It jumped into the exposed cables, using them as a network and bringing life to everything it touched. Buildings, parks, and streets were suddenly illuminated with the gentle buzz of lampposts, traffic lights, and long-dead appliances. The hum of the lights grew louder with each passing arc, becoming a deafening roar like 1,000 angry wasps. Transformers were being overloaded. It was too much. They began flickering and igniting, bursting into flames before showers of sparks rained down and the city went dark with it. Windows rattled against the surge of power, bulbs burst, and the dried nettle around the mushrooms caught fire. Smoke began billowing into the air, bringing with it the acrid smell of smoldering decay. A single pinpoint of red began to glow, hidden beneath the blinding curtain of smoke. The gentle hums and clicks of a computer rebooting went unnoticed against the chaos around it. The light grew stronger with each rush of electricity, and then blinked rapidly as Vel's eyes fluttered open. He sucked in a breath of air as he felt another surge of power rip through him, and he choked on the dust that covered his mouth and nose. Words appeared in the air before him, overlaying the vision from his cybernetic eye.
System reboot, 87% successful. Multiple vital system failures. Analyzing.
Turning his head to the side, Vel could just make out the towering shadow of a monolithic figure struggling against an assailant on its back. He could see the looming outline of a mushroom-infested city, collapsed buildings, and giant dead borer worms. Well, he'd made it back to Harmony Valley all right. Wonderful. Vel tried to sit up, but lacked the mobility to do so.
Analysis complete. 47,162 critical errors located. Correcting. Estimated time, 86.31 hours.
Well, that explained it. The ground rattled around him as Vel watched the clunky outline of Attila's ridiculous mech suit topple into a nearby building. How did that get here? A menacing clash of metal on metal, and Vel could see the propellers of that nightmare-inducing saw fly through the air and disappear behind what he assumed must be Alpha. Figures. Even unintentionally, Attila couldn't build a functioning machine. Vel rolled his eyes, and his cybernetic shifted into a scan mode. He could see Alpha's damaged form, outlined perfectly in sharp red lines. And there was the building that Trashbot had just been thrown into. Something with a heat signature was crumpled in a pile some 20 feet from him, an outline of a battered cowboy hat giving away its identity. And there, in a pile just a few feet to his right, was a pair of worn leather boots. Obviously, a lot had happened since he had gone offline. Trashbot flung itself free from the cables and wiring of the building, launching a Hail Mary attack. Alpha merely scoffed at the tiny mechanical creature and slammed his open palm into it. The machine's legs snapped like matchsticks, and it crumpled to the ground.
Is this the only champion you feeble humans have?
Vel strained to move his body. Both his legs were shot, but his remaining arm could move. Good thing he was only 3/4 robotic. He managed to crawl free from his trench, using a nearby machete to punch into the earth and pull himself along. He was nearly getting the hang of it when the ground trembled with Alpha's words. He lurched forward and felt his fingertips brush against the hard toe of the boot. Alpha laughed with rage as he turned and faced the dwindling gathering of troops, his hand still pressing the broken remains of the mech suit into the ground.
Is this the best you can do? Not quite, you gooey bastard,
Vel growled as he plunged his hand deep into the depths of the lost boot. Eric's ears perked up. There was a moment of silence, a still minute where everything around him halted. He could have sworn he'd heard his brother's voice. "Vel?" he called out into the silence before the cacophony of sound erupted around him once more. Vel let out a small chuckle of triumph as he felt around the inside of the shoe. Ignoring the fact that it was still warm, somewhat damp, and rather pungent, he pulled out a small control device he had seen Attila stash there weeks ago. He flopped over onto his back, his breathing labored with the effort of tugging his cybernetic body along the uneven pavement. He smiled and closed his eyes, his finger hovering over a giant red button on the side of the device.
This is for my home, you son of a bitch.
Click.
Trashbot 4000, self-destruct mode, initiated.
Alpha realized a moment too late that he was still holding the worthless pile of garbage in his hand and let out a howl of fury as it erupted against his palm. The explosion tore through him, ripping apart his surrogate body. Machinery and stone alike rained down, each piece covered in a thick, black tar. Vel opened his eyes to see the giant amethyst eye shatter into a cascade of diamonds. Catching what little light there was from the sun, they sparkled and twinkled, as if they were grinning with him. He had done it. Alpha and his stolen body were gone. The sparkle of gems extinguished as something large blotted out the remaining light. And it was growing larger, coming ever closer. Vel let out an angry sigh as he realized the massive refrigerator that made up the cockpit of the mech suit was flying through the air on course to collide with him.
Damn it.
There was a buzzing, an annoying sound like the murmur of a group of people just out of earshot. Didn't these people know it's impolite to bother a sleeping cyborg? Vel could just make out Attila's groans and grumbles. If he squinted just right, he could see the massive outline of Santa and one of his tiny elves.
Huh? It's not December, is it? How long have I been asleep?
Vel, don't die. Just hang on. Was that Eric? Why was he so panicky? He couldn't quite make out what his brother was doing. but judging by the sounds of grunting and the slew of curse words, he was trying to move the busted cockpit.
Get over here and help me!
There was a brief sound of heavy footfalls, and suddenly a weight was lifted off him. Much better, Vel thought as he let his eyes droop closed.
Hey, don't go to sleep! Stay awake!
It's hard to do anything, let alone take a nap, when your annoying brother keeps slapping you in the face.
No, it's okay. I just sleep.
Vel wasn't sure if he had actually said the words, or if he just mumbled them to himself. He shrugged internally. Oh well, it's not like they were his last words or anything. He felt a shaky hand wrap around the fabric of his shirt and pull him upright.
Okay. Sitting is okay. This is fine. Wait, are you crying?
Vel couldn't wrap his brain around why Eric was sobbing like a little child.
What's this? The mouthy servant has been injured.
Madam Whisper's voice was as recognizable as the dry desert air she summoned it from.
Mouthy? Rude?
He felt another shake against his chest.
He's not breathing!
Eric's voice was trembling with panic.
I'm not? Well, that can't be good. I guess that explains the crying. Here, move over. I've been certified in CPR.
He felt a meaty hand clamp around his remaining arm, as if Brig were attempting to wrestle him away from his brother. Vel paled at the thought of that bristled mustache on his face.
Dear God, please, no.
Allow me. It is the least I can do for a servant of the Great Slayer. And I blah, 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 blah.
Madam Whisper's words turned into a series of annoying sounds as Vel internally grimaced.
On second thought, I'd rather have the big hairy troll do it.
Can a skeleton even give the, kiss of wife?
Evan asked, almost squeamishly. And as suddenly as if he were tossed out of the pitch black and into the deep ocean, everything was glowing in ethereal blue. Wind whipped around him, through him, filling his very being with a soft and warm sensation. Vel's eyes snapped open, only to see the soulless, empty sockets of Madam Whisper's skeletal face, her bare teeth pressed against his lips. He let out a strangled cry of horror as he backpedaled, scrambling away as fast he could with only his arm to work with.
You're alive!
Eric laughed as he wrapped his arms around him. The two were unbalanced by the change in direction, and they fell back into the dirt and asphalt. Madam Whisper rose.
The deed is done. The debt repaid. Now, if no one else is in need of me, I have pressing matters elsewhere.
She turned on her ornate boot heel. Attila upped the volume of his groaning.
Oh!
He pressed the back of his hand against his forehead.
Oh! I can't breathe!
He collapsed backwards, his eyes clenched shut, and his lips pulled into an unmistakable kiss.
I gotcha, buddy.
Brig took in a deep breath and pushed down on Attila's scrawny ribs as he exhaled into his mouth. Attila sputtered, dragging a hand across his lips.
You jerk! I wasn't really hurt. I was aiming for a smooch from Her Highness over there. And you totally just K-blocked me.
Vel pushed his brother away as he propped himself up on his damaged elbow.
Get off me, you idiot!
Sorry, I thought I had lost you. Eric sat, defeated in the dirt, keeping his eyes averted as he wrung his hands together. I mean, I thought you were dead. When we found your body earlier, I couldn't find a pulse. So I thought you were gone. Vel paused.
Wait, you did what?
Eric furrowed his brows as he looked over at him. I checked for your pulse?
And when you didn't feel one, you just left me out here?
Vel gestured to the piles of dead worms and all the destruction. Yeah. That usually indicates someone is dead? Eric's mouth formed a line. Had being crushed beneath a repurposed refrigerator damaged his brain?
Yeah, when that someone has a heart to begin with, you idiot.
Vel pulled up his shirt, indicating the metal plates and scars across his chest.
I haven't had a heartbeat since you had that quack replace my organs with car parts.
The bitterness in his tone wasn't necessary. But hey, it was well enough deserved for being abandoned in a war zone. Oh, right. Alpha threw another long, gooey claw as he crawled his way across the rubble and debris of his once proud body. Pitiful humans and their pitiful planet. How embarrassing to be reduced to nothing more than primordial goo at the hands of primitive life forms. Well, he would just have to make it through the gate and work on repopulating his species. Then he would return and put an end to this excuse for a planet. Alpha almost had a hand on the portal when something dragged him backwards, lifting him from the ground. He swiveled around in his fluid form and gazed up at a terrible, grinning skull.
So here's where you've gotten to,
Madame Whisper cooed as she poked his gelatinous form with a bony finger.
I have spent many years trying to find you, and you were right under my nose this entire time.
She lifted her hands closer, gazing upon the glob of black ink as if it were an adorable puppy.
I never expected you to advance this far from your petri dish. But how you ended up on the other side of that accursed portal is a mystery to me. Perhaps one of my scientists had moral issues with your original purpose.
Alpha's mind reeled. His creator. He had not been banished, but stolen? His original purpose? Perhaps he needn't escape after all. So many questions he needed answers to. Oh, if only he had enough form to speak. The loving aura that Madame Whisper was exuding suddenly evaporated.
It is a shame you made such a mess of things, though. We could have made a fortuitous team.
The skeleton shrugged.
Alas, you grew far too ambitious for your own good.
Her words were transformed into daggers.
Nobody crosses me and lives. Not even you, child of mine.
Though her words were sharp, there was something of regret in her skeletal features as her fingers snapped tight around the blob, crushing the last speck of life from the once proud god. Attila sobbed dramatically, hugging the remains of Trashbot tight.
Sorry, buddy. I didn't mean for you to get hurt. We should have a eulogy for him. He was so brave.
Attila hiccuped and straightened up.
Anyone have any words to
Pulled.
say?
Vel rolled his eyes.
I'm not having a eulogy for this ridiculous piece of garbage. I would like to go home now.
He snorted in protest, mumbling as an afterthought.
Besides, you guys didn't have one for me.
Eric shook his head, and patted the refrigerator knowingly.
Thanks, Trashbot. You are truly, selfless.
As if in response to his touch, the refrigerator gave 3 hard booms, as though something were trying to break free. Eric jumped back, his eyes darting from the metal box to Attila.
What the hell was that?
The booming continued with 3 more, rather polite knocks. Attila lost a hasty round of rock, paper, scissors with Eric, and then again with Brig, and grudgingly moved to what remained of the handle of the refrigerator door. He hard against it and felt a mechanism inside release. Smoke spewed from within. The components and wiring of several computers and onboard control panels were strewn about. There was a noise like a feral animal, and something black fell out from the refrigerator and onto the ground. Slowly, it rose its head and looked around.
Grandma?
Even though she was covered in a thick layer of ash and residue, Evan could recognize her thousands of shawls and her knobbly cane.
Grandma, what are you doing out here? Or better yet, what were you doing in there?
Sadie coughed, dusting her hands enough so that she could scoop the soot from her face.
I went to claim my trade prize, which, by the way, was not as described.
She shot Vel a hateful glance.
But I figured, what the hell, maybe I could offload it on someone. Except when I got in, all the controls started wigging out. It shouted something like, "Master located," and locked me in. The controls wouldn't respond. I was trapped in there for ages.
She whipped around to face Vel again.
This thing's a piece of junk. I want a refund.
Vel stared back.
Yeah, that's not happening.
As the two began to argue, Attila leaned back against the remains of Trashbot as he tugged on his boots.
Hey, did we get rid of all the worms?
He asked, looking around as the remaining troops began treating their survivors. Briggs squinted through the smoke. It was as if a mass grave had been unearthed. The dead lined the streets and alleys, but the only movement he could see was from the soldiers. The shaking of the ground had ceased with the destruction of Alpha. He shrugged and turned back to see Attila laying across the top of the refrigerator.
Looks like it. Why, afraid her highness is going to keep her promise? Speaking of which...
Madam Whisper strode elegantly across the destroyed landscape, approaching them with her unwavering grin.
Ah, Slayer. I set out on this morning's sunrise to put an end to you and your servants. But as fate would have it, you have redeemed yourself to me, what with the destruction of not only the broodmother, but all her spawn.
She drew herself up to her full and immeasurable height.
And you have also dispatched an unknowable threat to all the worlds. Above and beyond the call of duty, you did not disappoint.
She placed a bony hand on Attila's shoulder, turning to look at the still smoldering remains of the guardian statue. Attila gave a nervous chuckle.
Yeah, all according to my plan.
And, of course, not many are willing to brave the mushroom forest without protective gear.
Madam Whisper had added, as though it were an afterthought.
You are truly the hero Lola promised you to be. Perhaps you could accompany back to my palace, where we can discuss how I might repay you and your servants.
Attila's eyes glazed over for a moment, thinking longingly about what Madam Whisper might have in mind.
Yeah.
Wait, The gears began to shift in his brain, and pieces of memory clicked together as he recalled one of his first ever conversations with Eric. A ripple of panic ran through him as he looked around. The towering mushrooms loomed over him in every direction, threatening to encase him in a tomb of red. He clamped his hands around his mouth and ran for the city's edge, screaming at the tops of his lungs, "Spores!" Of Monsters and Mushrooms, an ongoing series by Lesley Herron, is a crossover fanfiction mixing her own characters and settings with a few of those created by author J.D. Wiley. She writes for the fun of devising new ways of messing with her characters and seeing just how much trouble they can get into.
Seriously, I can't believe you left me for dead.
What? I was under a lot of stress. I'm sorry, I forgot you don't have a heart.
So now I'm heartless?
Heartbeat. I meant heartbeat.
Uh-huh. You still left me out there in the middle of a battlefield, and you call me heartless.
No, that's not fair. I tried to carry your body out, but you just weigh so damn much.
And now he calls me fat? Man, what a way to kick someone when they're 6 feet under.
You know, it's not too late to leave you for dead.
I suppose I forgive you.
Thanks, man. That means a lot.
Or I would if I wasn't so heartless.
Oh, come on.